In 1939, Bernard Garrett, a young boy in a small, segregated town in Texas, works as a shoe shiner outside the local bank. In an era of intense racial discrimination, Bernard is determined to observe and learn the ways of the white world that seems so distant and closed to black people. He listens carefully to the conversations of the bank's employees and clients, writing down everything he overhears in a notebook. One day, while Bernard is working, the chauffeur of a bank customer notices him and suspects that Bernard is spying. He threatens to tell Bernard's father. That evening, Bernard's father sees the boy's notebook and is impressed by his son's sharp intelligence, but he also expresses doubt about Bernard's future. He believes that no matter how smart Bernard is, a black man cannot succeed in a system built to keep him down. Fast forward 15 years. Bernard, now an adult, has saved enough money to move to California with his wife and son. They settle into a small room rented from his wife's uncle, who suggests Bernard should take up work in a factory. However, Bernard has bigger ambitions. He wants to go into real estate. His uncle laughs at his dream, dismissing it as unrealistic. Yet, Bernard's wife, who believes in her husband's vision, supports him and even offers to work in a club until Bernard can secure a property. The next day, Bernard meets a young white man named Matt, who assumes Bernard's uncle is wealthy. After searching the market, he finds an apartment building that could be a potential investment, but it needs extensive repairs, and Bernard can only afford to buy the building itself. His wife is concerned because the property is in a predominantly white neighborhood, but Bernard believes that black neighborhoods will eventually expand, and he wants to invest early. His wife suggests finding an investor, so she takes Bernard to a jazz club owned by Joe Morris, a wealthy and flashy acquaintance. However, Bernard dislikes Joe's attitude and quickly leaves, telling his wife he would never borrow money from someone like him. Determined to find a way to move forward, Bernard negotiates with the building's owner, a sharp Irish businessman who demands $40,000 for the property. Bernard tries to lower the price to $30,000, but the businessman refuses. Undeterred, Bernard proposes paying $30,000 upfront and the remaining $10,000 once the building is fully leased, arguing that there is a growing market of black professionals seeking housing outside the ghettos. Although the businessman is initially hesitant, Bernard's persistence and intelligence impress him. The businessman ultimately turns Bernard down but gives him the name of a bank and the manager's contact information. Bernard heads to the bank and, after a long wait, finally meets with the manager. He presents his case for the loan, and though the manager is initially dismissive, Bernard's persuasive arguments eventually lead the businessman to agree to help. This agreement marks the beginning of Bernard's success in real estate. When making repairs to one of his properties, Bernard encounters a white tenant who criticizes him, claiming a black man cannot own the building. Bernard's cousin's friend, Matt, arrives and questions Bernard's involvement. Bernard responds, "Money is green, that's the only color that matters." Later, when police arrive after the tenant falsely accuses Bernard of impersonating the owner, Bernard presents the title deed, and the officers leave, advising him to be more respectful. Eventually, Bernard's business flourishes. He is able to buy a nice house for his wife, and his properties attract reliable tenants. However, things take a turn for the worse after the Irish businessman's death. His widow offers Bernard a buyout for far below market value, claiming that she won't work with a black man. Bernard considers suing but realizes that their verbal agreement might leave him with nothing. Desperate, he goes to the bank manager for help, only to discover that the manager is now working with the Irish woman. Undeterred, Bernard comes up with a plan to buy the mainland bank in his hometown of Texas, the very same bank where he had once worked as a shoe shiner. Despite the challenges of doing business in a segregated state, Bernard convinces his business partner Joe to invest in the bank. They buy the bank, despite its owner, Robert Florence, being hesitant to sell. Bernard and Joe agree to keep Robert Florence's son, Robert Jr., as a credit expert, and Robert Sr. retains 20% of the shares. However, Robert Jr. becomes suspicious of Bernard and Joe's involvement in the deal, which leads to tension. Robert Jr. grows even more suspicious, and his distrust leads him to spy on Bernard's representative, Matt. Meanwhile, Matt becomes dissatisfied with his role at the bank, as he is merely a representative and not an official owner. His ambition grows, and he pushes Bernard and Joe to expand their operations by purchasing another, smaller bank. Bernard is reluctant but ultimately agrees. As Matt gains control of the new bank, things begin to unravel. He starts approving risky loans without consulting Bernard and Joe, and even hires a lawyer suggested by Robert Florence. Eventually, news spreads of the questionable transactions, and a federal investigation reveals suspicious activity at the new bank. Bernard and Joe realize that they've been set up, and they must now deal with the consequences of Matt's poor decisions. Matt, unwilling to let go of control, continues to make bad choices, which leads to the eventual revocation of the bank's license. The FBI arrests Bernard, Joe, and Matt. During a Senate hearing, Bernard refuses to confess to any illegal activities and delivers a powerful speech about racial discrimination in banking. Despite his compelling argument, the Senate remains unsatisfied, and the federal government seizes their assets. In the aftermath, Bernard, Joe, and their families are financially ruined. However, 3 years after the trial, the Fair Housing Act is passed, outlawing discrimination in housing based on race. When Bernard is released from prison, he and Joe are greeted by their wives. Bernard reveals that, despite the financial losses, they had secretly used their remaining assets to buy mansions in the Bahamas, where they begin new lives. The movie ends here. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel.